Hi everyone, welcome to Winning Wednesday. We're here today in order to interview Gabriela. We're here every Wednesday bringing you some content that we think will be good and refreshing for you. And so this week we're going to be discussing naturalization.
One of my favorite topics of all time.
A beautiful topic, how to become a U.S. citizen.
Yes.
So with that, we have some prepared questions that we're going to be going through. But again, if you have any kinds of questions, just feel free to break in and ask in the comments, and we'll try and get them answered.
Absolutely, we're here to help.
All right, Gabriela.
All right, so today I'm in the hot seat, right? Normally I'm usually the one asking the questions.
Right. And this week you're back from book club, so you're back like fresh out of retirement.
Heck yes, I am.
Okay, so first punch.
Okay.
What are the current paths to U.S. citizenship? We're going straight for the throat.
That's a great question, Brandon. And here's why that's such a great question. A lot of times, especially because of the political climate in our country, people often say, oh, paths to citizenship. This is going to be a path to citizenship, blah, blah, blah. The reality is, though, there is currently one path to citizenship, and that is having lawful permanent residence. A person must have had lawful permanent residence for a set period of time before they are eligible to apply to become U.S. citizens. Now, do you understand that people who have lawful permanent residence don't just automatically become U.S. citizens? They have to meet certain criteria and then pass an exam and be deemed worthy of citizenship. Once they are found to have met those requirements, and we'll talk about the requirements in a little bit, they can then be scheduled for the oath ceremony, and after they have attended an oath ceremony, that is when they now become a U.S. citizen. So it's a big process.
So is it like, I guess in law school I would kind of liken it to common law marriage, that there were certain elements that you kind of had to meet in order to become common law married, right? There had to be a ceremony, exactly right. There had to be blah, 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 whatever. I gotta be in that section.
That's okay. That's why you don't do family law.
Exactly. So is it like the citizenship kind of have these same elements where you have to have these things in order to become a U.S. citizen?
Correct.
Okay.
And there are approximately 8 requirements. 1, you have to have been a lawful permanent resident for a set amount of time. And that set amount of time depends on how you obtained your lawful permanent residence. So somebody who obtained their status because of marriage to a U.S. citizen has the right to apply for citizenship 3 years after they first received their lawful permanent residence. Okay. Oh, and everybody out there, remember, lawful permanent residence and green card. If I say green card, that's the same thing. It's just the informal way of saying it. People always refer to it as, oh, green card. There's a movie called Green Card, that kind of thing. But green card, if I should say green card, I am also referring to lawful permanent residence. Okay, so the requirements.
Some of us don't know that.
So requirements: have been a lawful permanent resident for a set amount of time. Spouses of U.S. citizens, so long as they're still married and residing with that U.S. citizen, can apply in 3 years. Everybody else has to wait a minimum of 5 years. Okay? A person has to be at least 18 years old to apply to take the citizenship exam. If they are not 18 years old, then they're not eligible. Okay? Here's a big one. They have to have good moral character. We'll get back to that one in a little bit.
Oh,
I know that sounds
talk about a gray area. Okay.
It does. It is a gray area, and I'll bring up some of those specific points. They need to be conversant in English, because one of the things that happens is that the exam, unless you've been a lawful permanent resident for a much longer period and are older, you will have to do it all in English. Okay, and we'll get back to those requirements about can we skip the English requirement. They also have to have an understanding of U.S. history and civics, so government history, that kind of stuff.
All the exciting things.
Oh, all the exciting things.
Okay, I actually really love those subjects. So.
They must have resided or they must have made, once they got their green card or lawful permanent resident, they must have made their home in the U.S. Okay? In other words, you can't just get a green card and then be like, oh, I'm going to take a job in Europe.
Okay.
Right? If you're...
So it's like a domicile rule.
That it's exactly a domicile rule.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And so either the 5 years or the 3 years, not only a domicile rule, but then an actual physical presence rule.
Okay.
Okay? So even if I have an apartment here, but my job takes me back and forth between New York and London, boy, do I wish.
Right.
But if that
what a horrible job.
Absolutely, right? But if I did that, it depends on 50% of my time during that 5-year period has to have been physically present in the U.S. Or if it's only a 3-year requirement, 50% of the 3-year requirement. So one of the questions they'll say is, put all the information about all the times that you've been out of the U.S. and then they'll match it up with your records, and so to make sure that you meet that.
Right.
And then you actually have to have lived in the state where you filed for at least 3 months before you filed your application to sit for naturalization.
Okay.
Okay?
Holy cow.
Yeah.
What a checklist.
It is a big checklist. It is absolutely a big checklist. And then, of course, the two final, the 7 and 8, which are simple, simpler. You must be willing to take the oath of loyalty to the U.S.
Okay.
If you're not willing to do that, then you just can't become a U.S. citizen.
Right.
And you have to submit an application, you have to submit pictures, and you have to pay the filing fee for the most part, right?
Okay.
Some people may be eligible to ask for a fee waiver, but not many.
Okay.
Okay? And so once you meet those requirements, then yes, you can apply for the exam. Then you get scheduled to take the exam in front of an immigration officer, an adjudication officer. And once they approve you, then you are scheduled for the oath ceremony. And then after you take the oath, then you get what's called a certificate of naturalization, or becoming a U.S. citizen.
Jeez.
So, not easy, not
yeah,
super
okay.
easy. So let's get back to some of those requirements. Do we want to talk a little bit about some of those requirements? Specifically, one that I think is a big point of contention is the good moral character.
Okay? Perfect.
Because I think that one, people in general...
well, and that seems like to be the grayest area.
It is the grayest area. It absolutely is. So the naturalization application has a lot of questions on it. And there are some questions that will cause you to be disqualified either for a period of time or possibly forever. Okay. There are some people that are permanently ineligible to
so just like not admissible.
No, admissibility is a completely different thing.
Okay.
Admissibility has to do with entry into the U.S.
Okay.
From a foreign country.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
This is why I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here too.
Okay. So
the good moral character. There are some things that are logical. So, for example, things that can disqualify you are certain crimes like drug crimes. Almost every drug crime and almost drug usage of any kind disqualifies you from citizenship. Not only that, but drug crimes can cause you to become what's called deportable.
Okay.
Which means they can initiate processes to take your green card and try to kick you out of the country. So that one kind of makes sense. There's others that also make sense, like lying to immigration benefits and getting a benefit that you never really were entitled to. So, like if I...
Like fraud.
Fake marriage.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Like fraud marriage, right? If they find out that through the process you weren't eligible because it wasn't a correct application, during the naturalization process, they can tell you, oh, wait, you were never eligible for naturalization, so or for a green card to begin with, so then they'll proceed with deportation stuff. Certain things that are logical, again, participating in terrorism or persecution of other people, lying to immigration to get benefits, helping people come to the U.S. without permission. But there's certain things that good moral character, because like you said, it's gray, it's very vague, would even cause someone to be ineligible. So for example, failing to file tax returns makes someone temporarily ineligible. Logical, of course. Failing to support children, failing to pay alimony orders.
Ooh, okay.
So, yeah. Receiving public benefits, welfare assistance that you're not eligible for, that you should have no right to, because there's certain benefits that only U.S. citizens, not just LPRs, can have. And so those types of things make it so that a person does not have good moral character. Now, that being said, I want everybody who is listening today not to think, oh, she told me good moral character, I have a DUI, or I have this crime, that means I can never apply for it. That's not correct. You have to talk to an immigration expert, like an immigration lawyer, like myself, a lot of good immigration lawyers in Kansas, that can then say, well, maybe you're temporarily ineligible right now, but you can become eligible if we get your taxes filed and then a certain amount of time passes and you keep filing them every year after that. So then it is able to turn it around, right? You're able to turn it around. But it is completely critical before you assess as being not eligible, that you talk to a lawyer.
Right.
I mean, that's all we can do.
Well, and the thing is too, so many times, everybody's really afraid of talking to a lawyer because they're really afraid of hearing that no answer. Right. And here's the thing you need to know about lawyers. We hate hearing no answers too. And so, if there's any way that we can kind of fix things, put things back together, craft some kind of remedy so that way we can make it realistic. I mean, that's what we're going to do. So the first thing you got to do is put your foot out of the door, So again, right? Be an active participant in your own rescue,
That's
right?
Exactly right. That's a big. That should be our motto,
our
right?
catchphrase.
I think it is our catchphrase.
We've earned
if not
it.
A motto, at least a catchphrase for sure.
We're putting it on our T-shirt. So
we should.
So okay. We've talked about what some of the requirements some of the people need to meet. We've talked about good moral fitness. Are there any exceptions to these requirements? I mean, I know that we kind of broached that subject.
We did.
Talking about taxes and filing those things. Are there any other exceptions that we need to know about? Notable exceptions?
Well, there can be. So, for example, like I shared with you that the 5-year rule exception if you're married to a U.S. citizen, that kind of thing.
Right.
But there's also other exceptions. So, for example, if someone has medical issues that make it hard for them to be able to study and comprehend the questions or have difficulties with English requirements, then those things with some medical waivers can be set aside, and then you still have the opportunity. The other piece of the puzzle, that the waivers that I often see are older aged people. So for example, if you've been a U.S. Lawful permanent resident for, if I recall correctly, I believe it's 20 years, and you're over the age of 50, then you don't have to have, the English requirement is not as hard. If you're over 55, it's 15 years, and so then that English requirement becomes not as taxing, right? Like I said, medical issues, a waiver with regarding medical issues can be enough to cause immigration to say, okay, we understand you're not capable of this preparation for this exam, but you still meet all the other requirements. You're a good person. You have always been honest with us, those types of things. So yeah, we can still grant them to you. Now, it's not a matter of just going there the day of the interview and saying, by the way, I can't do these things. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. There's a lot of evidence that needs to be presented. But once we do those things, then yeah, there are some exceptions. There's one exception with respect to crimes that I think is really critical. And I think it's really critical because it doesn't seem like it should be something that causes you to never be eligible, but crimes of dishonesty. If you've already been convicted of a crime of dishonesty that wasn't able to be amended or diverted or in some way, shape, or form set aside, a lot of times you will never be eligible to apply for citizenship.
So we're talking about like thefts,
petty theft. We're not even talking about bank robbery.
Right.
We're talking about I took a piece of gum from this store and they caught me.
Right.
The petty theft can be enough to make it impossible for someone to apply for citizenship. So there are some exceptions that are helpful, and then there's some exceptions. There's been people that I've had, that'll be like have a conviction for shoplifting that I'll say I would recommend that you don't ever apply for U.S. citizenship. Now, with those individuals, I think that as long as you continue to maintain your lawful permanent resident status correctly and you still keep following all the things that you're supposed to, then you'll still be able to remain in the U.S., but you won't ever get the great benefit of being a U.S. citizen.
Okay. So you kind of talked about the great benefit of being a U.S. citizen. Are there specific benefits to being a U.S. citizen that we're really wanting?
Oh, absolutely. So, for example, in my opinion, one of the biggest benefits of becoming a U.S. citizen is having the right to vote in elections. Elections help shape policy of the U.S. government. They help put people in power that are amenable and believe, like I do, like immigrants do, that immigrants help improve our country. And so individuals, it is believed that there's between 8 and 11 million people that are eligible for U.S. citizenship that haven't applied for it. Imagine how significant what kind of significance that would make in a U.S. election if 8 million immigrants became U.S. citizens.
Right.
Huge, right? Other things, U.S. citizens are the only ones that have the right to hold public office or elected office. There are certain federal and state governments that only U.S. citizens can do, and it's not all just high-level jobs, right? Like quick, very common job in most every city, the job of a police officer. Police officers are required to be U.S. citizens, right? So being a U.S. citizen opens up so many doors, not just in voting rights, but also opportunities to hold office, opportunities to apply for certain jobs. And so those are important. The other thing is that whereas both lawful permanent residents and U.S. citizens can petition for other family members to come into the U.S., however, U.S. citizens have a greater pool of people that they can apply for. So, for example, a U.S. citizen can apply for parents, children, and spouses, as well as siblings. Lawful permanent residents can only apply for not parents at all, spouses and children who are unmarried, and so that cuts down a significant pool for lawful permanent resident holders. The other downsides is that when the U.S. gives you lawful permanent residence, is that you're telling them, my plan is to live permanently, right? Permanent residence in the U.S. Now, there are certain instances that if you're gone from the U.S. for too long, they can actually take your lawful permanent residence away. And so those types of situations would make it difficult for someone to come back in, right? But U.S. citizens, once you're a U.S. citizen, you can live wherever you want. And
right.
You don't have to be like, oh, I have to be in the U.S. for 6 months at a time, so I need to only be gone for 6 months here, and then next year, No, once you're a U.S. citizen, you can be gone for 5 years and not lose your status.
Okay.
So, of course, then there's always things like having a U.S. passport sometimes makes it easier to travel to other countries. There's something called, that's actually, we call it Visa Waiver Program, but it's a worldwide program with developed countries where you basically can just go in for a certain amount of period of time without requiring a special visa to go visit, and so having U.S. citizenship really does open doors to a lot more opportunities than not having U.S. citizenship.
Right. So are there any other benefits that you think are important that we didn't cover?
Well, so one that is currently becoming more and more important is that lawful permanent residents will need to renew their lawful permanent resident card every 10 years. And right now, visa fees, filing fees to apply for these benefits are steadily increasing, right? Once you become a U.S. citizen, you never ever have to worry about applying for anything ever again.
Right.
So, and of course, as a U.S. citizen, you automatically can live wherever you want. You can work at whatever job you want. We're not even talking about the ones that you only can be a U.S. citizen for. We have work requirements or lawful status requirements in our country in order to get a job, and so you never have to worry about I don't have a card, my card's expired, and so the job isn't going to, that new job that I want to apply for isn't going to hire me because I don't have a valid, updated, unexpired lawful permanent resident. So those types of things are the things that really make U.S. Citizenship pretty attractive, in my opinion.
Okay. And in terms of, so we've kind of covered benefits. Are there potential problems or disadvantages?
There's probably a few disadvantages. The disadvantages are not perhaps as significant depending on what your desire is, right? So, for example, some countries, once you become a U.S. citizen and you've renounced your citizenship to that country, make it more difficult, for example, to own property in the country, right? So like especially like in certain countries, they have you have to be a citizen of this country in order to own land. So sometimes people who are current permanent residents who are thinking about U.S. citizenship, one of the things that they'll want to talk to with their lawyer is, hey, I have a house in Mexico. Is that going to make it harder for me to be able to have that house? Am I going to have to
Because you
sell
might
that
not
house?
own that house in Mexico real quick.
Correct.
Okay.
So to me, that's probably the biggest disadvantage. Sometimes people have emotional ties to their country. For some of those people, though, like one of the benefits is the possibility of dual citizenship. Now, I will tell you that the U.S. does not recognize dual citizenship.
We're so proud.
We want you to just be a citizen of our country. That being
We're
said,
so monogamous, the U.S.
Oh yeah. Anyway, but we do have other countries that will recognize that dual citizenship status. So, for example, they'll be like, okay, we know that they're not going to recognize it for you, but we'll still see you can still obtain or recapture your citizenship even if you renounced it a year ago or whatever. The only time that the U.S. pays attention to whether or not you're a dual citizen is depending on which federal positions you're applying for, right? Because there's that divided loyalties issue, right? And so there's some jobs that we want you to be, 100% in on the U.S. and that's logical because they're big, heavy-duty jobs that we don't want someone to be,
mixed emotions,
right.
conflicts of interest and such.
Correct. So those are really, to me, those are the big problems. Of course, then of course, the biggest disadvantage is not knowing correctly if you are eligible for U.S. citizenship and applying for it. Because as I said, not only can they say, no, we're not going to grant you citizenship, they can say, as a matter of fact, we're going to initiate deportation proceedings or removal proceedings, because removal sounds much nicer than deportation.
Yeah, it does, right?
And so the biggest disadvantage is if you don't know for sure if you qualify, because you didn't talk to a lawyer, you thought that just
it could be a trap.
You could choose, then
it's a trap.
It's a trap. So that would
Please don't sue us, Disney.
Disney.
Star Wars? They own that now. Bought it up?
Well, yeah, but does that mean that they have the movie that said it called It's a Trap? Isn't that the Seth MacFarlane?
No, that's OG Star Wars.
It's a trap.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
We'll talk
kids,
about that a little bit later,
trap.
guys. So sorry.
Immigration and Star Wars.
They're both traps.
Ugh.
They're not.
They
traps.
can be. They can be. Okay. Sorry, I got off topic.
You totally got off
so,
topic.
I can get sidetracked with Star Wars.
Business here. Come on now.
I know, and I'm running down the clock. So, good moral character requirement. We did kind of touch base on that. We talked about crimes of moral turpitude, those kinds of things.
Yes.
So, is there something that you think we need to know above and beyond that in terms of trying to navigate the good moral character requirement?
No, I really think it's just talking to a lawyer if you've had any kind of criminal history that can come back and bite you. Even if you think, well, it was just a blah blah blah, right? Sometimes people will be like, well, it was just a shoplifting, right?
Right.
But so to me, that's the biggest thing. I think that if you can confirm that you meet the eligibility, you confirm that you are ready for the exam and are successful in the exam, then you can apply and you should. So thank you so much, Connie. I just noticed that you sent us a question. You're saying we love you, we appreciate you so
Connie.
much. So your question is, what you're saying is I could become a U.S. citizen and still keep my German citizenship. It's a great question. Yes, it is possible. What you'll have to determine is whether Germany will allow you to recapture your German citizenship. And if they do, then you should be able to be dual citizen. Though the U.S. will not necessarily acknowledge your German citizenship, but that's okay, because when you come back in, you can just show them your U.S. passport and you have no problems. So I hope that answers your question.
Boom. Okay.
Boom.
So, we talked about good moral character.
Yes.
We talked about, are there any ways to kind of get around these requirements? These are the waivers, right?
Correct.
And we
Correct.
kind of discussed that. Are there any other waivers that we should know about?
Not that I can think of. Again, they principally have to do more than anything with the English requirements. The English requirements are the big one. So, question, Brandon, do you know that so when I talk about the application process, it's meeting these requirements, and then on top of that, demonstrating that you are actually conversant in English, and that
Conversant. Okay, I was trying to think of the word.
Oh, gotcha. And then also pass the exam. The exam must be passed with a 60% or more requirement. The exam is typically 100 questions that are out in the USCIS.gov. They're on our website. You can find the questions just about everywhere.
Okay.
But the questions are really interesting, and some of them are simple, some of them are not as simple. So, for example, can you name 3 of the the people who work in the chairs that work in the president's cabinet?
Okay. The Department of Transportation?
No.
Oh, the chairs.
Secretary.
Secretary. Okay. Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General. Okay. So I made it.
Those are the types of things.
Oh, thank you for that softball. I was like, oh, is she trying to embarrass me?
No. No, I'm kidding. Some of them are easier, right? Like, what do the 13 stripes on our flag represent?
The 13 original colonies. Oh my God.
Now name the 13 original colonies. No.
Okay.
Stop.
I've been practicing on Jeopardy for all of you who are ready for that. Okay.
So those are some of the questions, but you have to have a 60% correct answers in order to be eligible.
While also being conversant in English.
While also being conversant in English,
Okay.
yes. If you take the exam and you miss and you don't pass by 60%, they do give you the opportunity to take a second exam, but then after that, then you have to pay for a new application process.
Okay.
So.
Yikes.
Getting pricey too.
Okay. So we talked a little bit also about proficient in English.
Yes.
So final question, why should people take the time to talk to an immigration attorney before they try the do-it-yourself naturalization application process?
So to me,
talk about a bear trap.
That's why. That's exactly right. The reason is that there are certain requirements that if you miss, if you, like I said, if you have something even minor, like a criminal history, it can make it so that not only are you not eligible for citizenship, but immigration services can initiate a proceeding to remove your lawful permanent resident status. And so it really can save someone's, I'm going to say life, because having green card, having lawful permanent residence is so crucial in our country, and so definitely very important. Oh, we got another question online. Thank you so much, Logan. Appreciate it. What is meant by being conversant in English? Just the ability to hold a conversation in the language? Yes, and it has to. And it doesn't have to be a very in-depth conversation. It doesn't have to be something that you would discuss like with a doctor or a lawyer. It does have to be, though, that you understand the questions that the adjudicating officer is asking. It requires that you also are able to write whatever sentence the adjudication officer dictates to you, and you have to read whatever sentence the adjudicating officer has ready for you. And so if you mess up in any one of those pieces, then they can determine that you are not conversant. So great question, Logan. Thank you so much.
So that's like an actual determination that somebody makes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it'll be the adjudicating officer.
Okay, that was my last hard question of the evening. It is now 5:01, so we're done.
Yes,
we're done.
Are.
So
except,
what do we? Okay.
Except that if you guys wait for un poquito de tiempo, I'm gonna do it in español.
Oh my gosh, yes!
I'm gonna repeat this whole conversation. Except Brandon won't be here, so we're gonna be saying goodbye to my sweet Brandon.
Yeah. I'm out on the Spanish stuff.
And then we'll be just summarizing these key points in Spanish. So.
What are we doing next week?
Next week is finally the week that I kept messing up and telling everyone, oh, we're going to do that this week. No, it's not. Finally, next week, business people. This is going to be the program that you want to watch, because this is the one that's going to be best practices for year end for entrepreneurs. We're going to be here with our friend and colleague Lisa Ward, who's going to share with us all her vast business law knowledge. Or actually, she doesn't have.
She might even do a few magic tricks.
We don't have the time to ask her about everything she knows about business law. That's a smart girl. But we will be able to talk about some processes that an entrepreneur should take on before the year end. So we look forward to talking to you guys about that, and Lisa and I will be here next Wednesday, and that one will only be in English.
Awesome. Okay. So
eventually I'll start doing all of these in with a Spanish follow-up as we get
as we grow into the mighty superpower. Hit us again if you have any questions. Again, next week is going to be entrepreneurs into business planning, beginning of next year planning. So if you have questions, please send us those questions and we can get them answered. If you have questions about any of the topics that we've covered, send us a message and we'll try and get them answered. If you have questions, you can reach out to us, 785-776-2000.
Absolutely. And schedule an appointment to talk to Brandon and I about either naturalization, immigration law, or Brandon is a criminal defense guru. And so some of the stuff that we want you to avoid getting, like shoplifting charges and converting them to something else, you should come and talk to Brandon about, because he can help answer those questions and maybe even help you before it's too late.
And one of the amazing benefits of having Gabriela here is, as a criminal defense practitioner, you know, sometimes I have clients who come in and they have immigration implications for criminal issues. And so, you know, like I have that resource like right at my fingertips, super easy. I walked onto Gabriela's office, I talked to her, she leads me in the right path. So if you ever find yourself charged with a crime and you have immigration consequences, please come talk to us.
Absolutely.
It's not an area that we're completely unfamiliar with, so.
Absolutely. You guys, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you next week. And then in January, when we return, we are going to be adding, and this is something that I haven't been sharing too much with everyone, but we're going to be starting to add family law into the mix.
Yes.
Yes, we're excited about that. And so in January, be on the lookout, because January we're going to be doing a really good program on Kansas child support guidelines. So
we're getting full service, y'all.
Heck
so if you have any like general questions, weird stuff, whatever, just send it to us and we'll try and get it answered.
Bye bye, guys. Thank you so much for being here.